everyone, my name is Steve. I'm the developer relations lead here in New Relic. So what do? Actually is I manage the relationship, but also I teach customers, engineers, developers how to use New Relic with your application. I also act as a bridge with our product management. If you have any feedback or ways we can help you to actually improve your instrumentation, I'll be the right person to actually reach out here in New Relic for Asia. Thank you so much for joining this session. My name is Steve, and today we have a really good topic. I remember nowadays we have so many platforms for you to actually host your application. Once you build it, you're spoiled with so many choices, including popular platforms such as AWS, GCP, and Azure. But this particular talk, we're going to focus on niche platform, which generally they are highly discussed, especially among web developers. So today, I'm going to share my thoughts and opinion on Heroku, Netlify, and Vercel right here. So first and foremost, let's start with Heroku. You probably heard about Heroku either through some form of tutorial or maybe some form of article have you read online, because Heroku has been around for a really long time. There's a reason why Heroku is widely known in the industry, because Heroku got acquired by Salesforce. So Salesforce is a really large organization, and there's a high chance your organization is using some form of services by Salesforce too. Therefore, it's quite common to see this within the industry itself. Within Heroku, what they really offer is platform as a service. You have no control on the underlying infrastructure, like AWS or some of the popular cloud platforms, but at least you can control anything that's above the platform. So at least you can actually choose to actually deploy your services and some of the controls around it right there. Now, here's the thing with Heroku. The one that really made Heroku really popular is the concept of dynos. So you can actually read a lot about dynos within Heroku, but that's the heart of the platform itself. What dynos really is actually a virtualized Linux environment that it's actually well-tuned, and you can actually run your application relatively quick within the whole services itself. Within Heroku, there are a couple of things you need to be mindful of. First, if you're coming from a pure front-end developer with not much information or background on backend, it might be overwhelming. But if you're coming with some knowledge of underlying backend knowledge, Heroku is going to be perfect for you, because you're going to need some background knowledge, because you need to actually do things like specify your package, your version, what do you need, and you're going to work across this thing called prop files. Prop files, in a nutshell, it's just a workflow script that you tell Heroku what to run, what command you want to execute. It's not that hard, but it's relatively easy to learn too. And also, some of the most common services, such as PostgreSQL, Redis, and much more, it is available to you if you want to connect to your web apps right there. Now, one thing you want to be mindful of is Heroku has a really strong backend support, because again, it just goes back to the underlying technology, because it is platform as a service. You have much more control. Therefore, the control that you need for backend services is also better too. Now, one thing also you want to be mindful of, Heroku is very strong with enterprise features. The reason is because it has been around for a long time. It's used by a lot of enterprise companies around the world, and therefore it makes sense for them to offer you enterprise feature. And therefore, from a cost point of view, it's going to be much more higher compared to two other vendors I mentioned, such as Netlify and Vercel. I think personally it is fair, because somebody has to pay the bills. Someone has to pay the developers that actually develop those services, and someone has to pay the bills to make sure the platform is working well. Just be mindful of that because of the enterprise feature that you can see within Heroku right there. Now, one thing you need to know, there's a lot of tutorials, a lot of guides out there that talk about Heroku, especially on the free plan. When you first deploy your application on Heroku, you're going to be okay, but later on, if you want to fire up an app, you need to be mindful of sleep time, which is the apps actually need to go through the startup process, actually running up. There is a time that's being involved. It's not a big deal, and I think it's actually fair too, especially on a free plan, but that's something that you need to be mindful of. If you are paying this or paid plan, you're going to be fine, and that's not a big problem. So that's actually on the Heroku that you actually can host your web apps right there. Now let's just go through and talk about some of the things you can expect in Heroku. Heroku, again, being the most mature of all of them, has been around for a long time. Documentation is very mature. They have a very good onboarding flow across different languages, very detailed, step-by-step, which is really not that hard. In fact, it's probably one of the earliest platforms that a lot of developers go to when they want to deploy web apps right there. Also, one thing I really admire about Heroku is there's a lot of resource that actually help you to fine tune your configuration, but also looking after apps that's hosted in Heroku right there. For example, we can see right here, for example, getting like memcache, how to use memory, how to do HTTP caching. There's a lot of good resources to help you as a developer to make sure your application is running well. Also, again, being more enterprise featured within Heroku, they actually have a proper operational UI that once you deploy an app, you can see some of the more operational metrics within the platform, which they offer, which is designed specifically for the developer target audience right here. So let's just move forward and start talking about Netlify. Netlify has been around recently, and they're probably the coolest kid around the block right there. But that's a good reason why a lot of people rave about Netlify. Mainly because of the movement of JAMStack, JavaScript, API, Markdown. So if you've read about JAMStack or if you're looking into JAMStack, you're going to come across Netlify right there. So Netlify, it is available as a serverless platform. So serverless means it's one layer above the platform as a service, and it actually goes through a lot of serverless function characteristics underneath it right there. So what it really is with the layer of abstraction that's being extracted and the ease of use that you're going to get with serverless function, there is some limitation. You just need to be mindful with that trade-off. Again, not a big deal. If you're a developer, you just want to deploy apps, you don't want to care about backend operations, serverless platform actually can be a really good choice for you to actually consider. One thing I will say is, especially for Netlify, from my personal experience, it's blazing quick. Once you already have an application hosted on GitLab or GitHub, straight away you can see application that's really running in your environment right there. But partly because, why is it so quick? Because Netlify is really good for static apps. And also, if you're coming from a front-end developer, Netlify offers you a lot of front-end client-side features, which I think you appreciate when you use the platform right there. Now, one thing you want to know about Netlify is what made them also famous is this thing called Netlify Edge. Apart from deploying your web apps relatively quick, they also go through a CDN approach. Again, CDN, a lot of developers dread around it because it's not fun. When CDN is down, it's going to affect your web apps. But what Netlify Edge and what they did right here is made CDN good, easy to configure, and just a lot of location you can choose from right there. Now, one thing I also want to mention right here, Netlify has a lot of good resources on JAMStack. I mean, if you look at the screen right here with this stack, they have really cute logos right here. It just makes learning a bit more fun. And if you're interested in JAMStack, I think Netlify has some really good resources for you too. Again, with this conference, City of JS, India, there's another talk specifically focused on JAMStack. Netlify can be a good complement once you develop application on JAMStack. Now, one thing to note, Netlify and Vercel, which I'll cover a bit more, Netlify tend to target more for front-end developers, but they are actually expanding on the back end. So it really depends where you're coming from. Each platform is right for the right target audience right here. Again, with Netlify and Vercel, it's actually hard to compare because they're quite unique in their own ways and they focus on different target audience. The only thing that probably is wildly debated and people talk about is commercial apps. So commercial apps is, can you actually host production paid apps with a free platform right there? Now, just one thing you want to be careful of, it is possible to do it in Netlify, but if you want to do production or commercial apps on a free plan, my recommendation is you just have to be very careful with support and the response time that people are going to get back to you because they're always going to prioritize paid customers. Just be mindful with that considerations right there. Now, another one that you want to go through is just look at the onboarding right here where we can see, it's pretty easy to onboard an application here within Netlify. That's actually a very good step-by-step guide that's available to you. As mentioned earlier, once you have application hosted in GitHub or GitLab, Netlify can pick it up and deploy really quick. As mentioned, the one that really draw your attention is the Netlify Edge, which you actually can host in a lot of distributed or various locations on the CDN service right there. One thing you need to be mindful of is within the Netlify Edge, they actually have basic and high performance offering. Basic was the one that's free, high performance, which is the one that's paid. Again, I think it's a fair ask because within the high performance service, there's a SLA, but also there's an additional resource and configuration that's available to you, and also additional location too. So just to be mindful of that trade-off. But again, if you're just trying out a project, maybe just a quick MVP, basics is usually good enough right there. Now let's talk about Vercel. If you probably come across Vercel right there, mainly because of Next.js. Maybe you're hosting a React application and you're using in production and you're using Next.js as a framework, you're going to come across Vercel because they actually created Next.js. Again, Vercel operates on the premise it is a serverless platform. It uses the characteristic and principle that what you can expect in a serverless function. Again, they made it relatively relatively easy, but you just need to be mindful of the trade-off right there. Now, within itself, how Vercel really differentiate themselves right here is Vercel is best for dynamic apps. Dynamic apps is a bit more complex because you actually can do much more customization, and there's much more things you need to consider for dynamic apps. And also, one thing that Vercel do quite well, especially if you're the developer that have some form of infrastructure or backend experience, Vercel is going to feel much more home at you. The reason is because there's a lot of things that you can configure. It has much more backend controls, but you can use things like CI workflows that you're familiar with. You actually can use together with Vercel right there. Now, one thing that I really like about Vercel, and something that I'm paying very close attention, is this thing called edge functions. What edge function really is actually decoupling serverless function and put it at the edge. Another way of saying it, this is edge computing using serverless function. That's really cool. But one thing you need to be mindful of is there's much more backend infrastructure experience required because you're actually going into edge computing right there. It's very promising. It's really interesting. However, you need to configure middleware. So just be mindful of the operational overhead. But again, with that, I think it's quite worth it because you're actually moving your apps closer to your consumer or the people that you try to serve right there. One thing I also really like about Vercel is they have this thing called the production checklist. Production checklist is something very handy for developers. The reason I say this is because when engineers, developers, when we deploy app into production, we will pray and hopefully everything is going to be okay, right? So one thing that what they do very well is the production checklist actually go through, hey, if you're going to deploy this, did you do this particular step? This step is available in this particular UI, and this is what you want to look out from a configuration settings point of view. I think this is great. It just really reduced the mental load that we need to do as engineers when we actually use a specific platform right there. Now, going back again, one of the things that's slightly a bit different compared to Netlify is Vercel tend to target more for backend engineers or people that have backend experience, but they're actually actively expanding and actually offering features on the front end. Again, both Netlify and Vercel, they have different target audience they go for right there. One thing I want to be mindful of is, again, this is quite clearly stated, commercial apps or production paid apps is not possible. They stated very clearly with their statement, with their legal statement right there. Again, I think this is fair because especially for a paid production app, if something goes wrong, usually you need the support that you need. Again, you get what you paid. Just be mindful of the offering that you want to get when you actually go for Vercel right there. All right, just to go through again, with Vercel, with much more backend controls, so how do you actually model the application? You actually get it through logs on the backend, and they actually have really good resource and resource available to you actually get those logs out. As mentioned earlier, because we're going to edge function, you actually deploy a function by region, and there's much more configuration you need to be mindful of, which again, not a big deal if you're coming from backend. But if you're a front-end developer, just be mindful that additional configuration and knowledge you need to be mindful of when you're operating that middleware right there. So one thing is good about Vercel, which I think I really admire them too, is if you want to try out Next.js as part of a React framework, they actually have a catalog right there. You can actually try it out relatively easy within the Vercel platform right here. All right, just to sum it up right here is what's the difference between Netlify, Vercel, and Heroku. Netlify and Vercel, if you're starting out or you just want to do a really simple app, just want to see the results relatively quick, both platforms are a good option. Again, when the time is right, if you want to start scaling up, they can be a really good one. And they do have the right commercial offering and support structure for it. As mentioned, Netlify is targeting more towards front-end developers, or back-end, while Vercel, it targets more towards back-end developers right there, or developers with back-end knowledge right there. Both resonates really well with the no ops movement, means no operation, what it really means is I don't really want to touch a lot of the operational side of maintaining apps. They actually resonate quite well with Netlify and Vercel right there. So for us in New Relic, if you want to go with Vercel or Netlify, we actually going to have integrations very soon. In fact, the Netlify that we actually have it right here, we actually just released our integrations where you can actually onboard the New Relic agent relatively easy if you want to use New Relic to actually instrument and have deep visibility within your web app itself. Vercel is coming up very soon. In fact, that's coming up next quarter. We're actually going to have guides and integration for Next.js and also Vercel right there. Next, I'm going to talk about Heroku. Heroku tends to be much more suitable for really large enterprise-grade application where you need enterprise feature. It makes sense because sometimes there are certain applications that requires those enterprise features. Heroku is really good for that. They have a free plan. You need to be mindful of the sleep period right there. With Heroku, because it is platform as a service, not like serverless function, there is some knowledge that's being required, especially from a backend infrastructure services right there. Again, from a Heroku integration with New Relic, there's a lot of articles out there. You can just Google them relatively easy, but also within this deck itself, I have links for you which you can jump straight into it. You can see a lot of out-of-box integrations available for you, especially if you're using Heroku. Okay. Now, just to wrap it up right here, I made it simple for you with this event. Just bring up your camera or your phone, just scan that QR code, and you actually can get into and sign up with a free account. I want to make this clear statement. We have a free forever account for developers where you actually can instrument your app and maintain it within New Relic platform right here. So for this event, not only we have a free account, but also we have swags, which is shirts like this, which you actually can sign up. We actually going to send it to you right there. Again, just go through the link, just put your details. You have your free account, but also we'll send this out to you so they can enjoy it. But again, I have the QR code, but also the link for you as you can go through right there. Okay. Now, as mentioned earlier, there's so many things I want to mention because of timing, like GCP, Azure, and AWS. Those are honorable mention, which also they offer their service. But I wanted just to narrow down. This are the three most discussed and debatable vendor right there, especially if you want to host web application. If you have any question, just feel free to reach out to us. I'm more than happy to have a chat with you. With that, thank you so much for your time.